Welcome back to the Unrevealed Realities, the place where hidden stories, forgotten struggles, and untold emotional journeys rise from the shadows and step quietly into the light. In Secret Chapters, we explore those delicate, fragile threads of memory that shape us in ways we don't realize until life brings us back to the beginning, and tonight, we unfold a story buried under 2 decades of silence. It began on a quiet autumn evening, the kind where the wind feels older than the trees it moves, and the fading sunlight stretches across the floor like a memory stretching across time. It was 6:47 p.m. when the old cardboard box was pulled from the top shelf of a forgotten cupboard, dust drifting into the amber light like tiny fragments of the past. Inside were objects that once meant everything. A broken toy car with the paint peeling off, a stack of letters written in uneven handwriting, a faded photograph of 5 children standing in a row, arms around each other, grinning as though the world could never separate them. The moment the picture surfaced, the heart inside the room seemed to pause. The person holding the photograph, Ian, felt something sharp and familiar tug inside his chest, something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in 20 long years, longing. Raw, unfiltered longing, childhood longing. Ian had left his childhood home 2 decades ago, carried away by circumstances that children cannot negotiate with: migration, uncertainty, instability, the sudden shift from knowing everything to knowing nothing at all. His father had been offered a job in another country, and within days the world Ian had known, the streets he had memorized, the laughter that echoed in his bones, and the friends who felt like limbs attached to his heart, were all left behind. At the age of 11, he didn't understand loss. He only understood movement. One day you were here, the next you were somewhere else. But now, as he stared at the faded photograph, he felt every year of absence collapse inward, making a soundless scream in the chest. In the picture, in the far right corner, stood Zion, the boy who used to race him to the old banyan tree, who once saved Ian from falling into the canal, who used to swear that they would grow up to be neighbors forever. Next to him was Alina, with the red ribbon in her hair, the one who always knew the answers in class, who wrote stories in her notebook and read them to the group under the bridge when the summer sun became unbearable. On the left was Hassan, shorter than everyone, but brave enough to fight older kids when they teased someone. And in the middle stood Ian, squinting at the sun, unaware that this tiny frame of time would one day become the compass that pointed him back home. For years, Ian had believed that memories should be left alone, that returning to the past only opened doors that were better sealed. But something about the photograph had been waiting, silently, stubbornly, for the day it would demand to be heard. And that day had come. He placed the photograph on the table, sat down, and stared at it as the room grew darker. Outside, the world carried on, but inside his mind the sounds of his childhood rushed in like a broken dam: bicycle bells, laughter bouncing off old walls, marbles clacking on dusty ground, the smell of roasted corn near the railway tracks, the voices calling each other's names across the street. It was a storm of memories, loud and overwhelming. For the first time in 20 years, Ian whispered their names again. And something deep inside whispered back, "Find them." That night, he barely slept. At 3:12 a.m., after hours of pacing, he decided. He would go back. He would search every street, every corner, every record, every hint of the life he once lived. He would find Zion, Alina, and Hassan. He owed it to the 11-year-old boy he had been, to the friendships that had kept him alive in the hardest years, and to the memories that refused to die. The next morning, he booked a flight. The journey back felt unreal. Watching the clouds below the airplane window, Ian felt like he was traveling into a memory rather than a place. His heart thumped with anticipation, fear, and something undefinable, like stepping toward a truth he wasn't prepared for. When the plane landed, the air felt thicker, warmer, heavier with familiarity. The first breath he took on the homeland soil felt like a piece of himself locking back into place. The city had changed. It was bigger, louder, faster. The small shops he remembered had turned into glass storefronts. New roads cut through old neighborhoods like scars, stitched over time. But somewhere beneath these layers of development, the childhood streets still whispered their stories, if one listened closely. Ian hired a taxi and gave the driver the address of his old neighborhood, a place he had memorized so deeply that 20 years failed to erase it. As the taxi drove further into the older parts of the city, the sounds changed: less modern noise, more echoes of the past. When the car stopped, Ian stepped out and just stood still, letting the weight of returning sink into his bones. The neighborhood looked both familiar and foreign. The building he had lived in seemed smaller, as though time had reduced its stature. The alley where he once played cricket was still there, though the walls were covered with new layers of graffiti. The old bakery on the corner had the same signboard, only rusted and fading. Ian walked slowly, each step a memory unfolding. He reached the little open ground where he and his friends had once spent entire afternoons. The banyan tree was still standing, older now, its roots thicker, its branches wider. He touched the trunk, and for a moment he felt 11 again. But nostalgia wasn't enough. He needed answers. He approached the shopkeeper at the bakery, a man in his late 50s with graying hair. "Excuse me," Ian asked cautiously. "Do you remember a family that lived in that building years ago?" "The Mirza family. I used to live here, a very long time ago." The shopkeeper squinted, studying Ian's face as though searching for a shadow of the boy he once knew. Then suddenly, recognition flickered. "Ian, little Ian," he exclaimed. Ian's eyes widened. The man chuckled. "I used to give you free candy when your mother wasn't looking." Something warm cracked inside Ian's chest. He had not expected to be recognized. "I'm trying to find my childhood friends," Ian said softly. "Zion, Hassan, and Alina." The shopkeeper's expression shifted. Not sadness, not worry, something more complex. "You should talk to old Rafik," he finally said. "He knows everything about everyone. He sits near the tea stall every evening." Ian thanked him and followed the narrow lane to the tea stall. There, under a dim bulb, sat an elderly man with a white beard and a faded shawl wrapped around his shoulders. He looked like someone who had seen too many stories pass by. When Ian introduced himself, the old man nodded slowly. Yes, I remember your group. 5 children who ran like the wind," he said, chuckling. "But time has taken them far." Ian leaned in. "Do you know where they are now?" The old man sighed. "Zion's family moved after his father passed away. Hassan, well, he didn't stay here long either. As for Alina," he paused. His voice softened. "Her family left after the riots." Ian felt his heartbeat quicken. "Do you know where they went? Any clue at all?" The old man looked at him carefully, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a small folded piece of paper. "Years ago, her father left this with me. He said if anyone from the old neighborhood ever came looking for them, give them this." Ian's breath caught. He opened the paper with trembling fingers. It had an address. Just an address. No names. No explanation. Just a point on the map that suddenly felt like the center of his universe. He left immediately. The address led him across the city, through neighborhoods he had never seen before, areas where the air smelled different, where the rhythm of life beat under a different pulse. It was late, 11:09 p.m., when he finally reached the place. It was an old apartment building. Quiet, dim, the kind of building where stories went to sleep. Ian hesitated for a moment. What if he had come all this way only to face disappointment? What if they didn't remember him? What if life had changed them beyond recognition? What if 20 years of silence had erased the past? But he knocked anyway. The door opened slowly, revealing a woman in her late 20s. Her hair was tied loosely, and her eyes, those eyes, held the same depth he had seen in the photograph. Ian felt his breath disappear. "Alina," he whispered. She stared at him, confused for a moment, then something clicked. Her hand rose to her mouth. "Ian," her voice cracked. The next second felt like the universe folding in on itself. 2 decades of separation dissolved in a single heartbeat. They sat inside for hours. Talking, remembering, filling in the missing years. Ian learned that Zion had moved to another city and that Hassan was working in a nearby town. They exchanged numbers. They planned to meet. But the story didn't end there. The very next day, Ian traveled to find Hassan. When Hassan opened the door, he froze in shock before erupting into laughter and pulling Ian into the tightest embrace. They spent an entire afternoon revisiting the fragments of their childhood, stories they thought they had forgotten, secrets they had sworn to keep, promises buried but not broken. Together, they traveled to meet Zion. When Zion saw them, his expression flickered between disbelief and overwhelming emotion. The reunion felt like the world healing itself. That night, the 3 of them and Alina gathered near the old banyan tree, the same place where they had once built their dreams. Now older, wiser, scarred by life, they looked at each other with a kind of gratitude that words could never express. They sat under the branches, sharing stories until the sky turned from dark blue to pale morning. It felt like time had folded, connecting 2 distant ends into a single thread. And in that moment, Ian realized something profound. Sometimes the past doesn't stay behind. Sometimes it waits quietly, patiently, for the moment when you are strong enough to return to it. not to live in it, but to reclaim the part of yourself that you left there. The lost memories were no longer lost. They were alive, breathing, warm, reconnected, and as dawn broke through the branches, lighting their faces with a soft golden glow, Ian whispered to himself, "I am home." Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, share, and stay tuned for more stories on the unrevealed realities.